Hi everyone! Today we are meeting for our last month for our learning series, and this month will be dedicated for systems thinking. When you think what is system thinking exactly in the terms of our learning series, the good metaphor is when you look to the camera and you have zoom in function and zoom out function. So same is with your daily work when you think about yourself and your team. Sometimes when you're concentrated on completely, as a specialist to complete some task, this is when you're really zoomed in into something very specific, quite little within the, when you look within the big system. When we think about zooming out metaphor, so this is where you, from your task, you really put that away and you look to that task from the perspective as it's the part of the bigger picture. Let's go now into more details. I'll give you more explanation how systems thinking can be understood in comparison with our maybe habitual model of reductionism. So our quite common model in our behaviors as well is look to the things, let's say you have your team. And while looking at your team, you have your different employees. So let's imagine you have 7. And looking through the lens of reductionism, you look at each of the employee separately, right? They are connected to the team as a whole, but you look at each of them and how they are performing, what they are doing, what functions, what level of engagement do they have. So usually the analysis through the model of reductionism is break the element into each parts, into different parts, and look at each part separately and then combine it back together. That's called reductionism. What we will be doing this month, we look at through the systems thinking perspective, which says, wait. These are different parts of the system and they do interact with each other as well. So instead of taking it and separating it differently, what you do is first you identify a system that might be your team or your team's connection with another team. And what do? You try to get the whole outline and then understand how parts of this system interact with each other. So how different employees in your team are impacting each other for their level of engagement, for their productivity, as well how members of other teams are impacting your employees. During this month, in all the learning series, we will use 3 key parts for the systems when we'll analyze and think about it. First part is elements. So every system has its own elements. In this case, that was your employees. Then these elements need to have interconnections with each other. And then we'll look a lot into the function or purpose that each of the system should be having. There are some tools and techniques that are specifically used within the systems thinking that help you to analyze the challenge, problem that you have within the system. Let me give you an example, and it's called fishbone diagram. I believe some of you have used it maybe in your career. How it looks like. Let's take the same metaphor as I said with the zoom in and zoom out with a photo camera. Imagine you got a blurry photo, right? So you have blurry photo. What you need to do, you need to think, okay, how came I've got this result? And looking at the blurry photo through the systems angle, you look, what could cause this, right? And one part can be equipment. Another part being process. Then we can have user. And the last bit, environment. This allows you to zoom out just from the result as a blurred photo and to analyze in more depth what have happened and how these elements interconnected with each other as well, so you have the result as you have it. So maybe in the process that was out of focus, or shutter speed too slow, or maybe looking at the equipment you had damaged sensor or a dirty sensor, or looking at the environment, maybe subject moved too quickly, or maybe that was too dark, or maybe you as a user had shaky hands. Maybe few of them that you name even could connect with each other that resulted in the blurry photo. It's just one of the examples of the tools that are available for you that you can use to tap more into the systems thinking. One more very often used is behavior over time graph. And behavior over time graph looks very simple, right? So you have the time scale, which would be, let's say, by the month, January, February, etc. And then you have here the behavior that have changed throughout the time. So if you have this, you can already predict a bit of that. So this allows you to zoom out, to look at the picture that you have at the present time, the current element, to look at more from the zoom out angle at it. So this is just few examples of what you could be using, but I want to present you an iceberg technique. An iceberg technique will be used further in the process as when you will work with yourself, with your team, and with the company as a system perspective. As a tool for guiding systems thinking, during this month, we'll use the iceberg model. And in the iceberg model, you see 4 different parts of it. Where we start, and which is the top of the iceberg, it's the events. And events, with the question, what just happened? Usually it's very visible, you have it in front of you. And let's take a personal example connected to that. Maybe you got ill, you just caught a cold. That's the event, very visible to you. You have a fever, high temperature. Now you can look at the patterns and trends. And this is where you can ask the question, what trends there have been over time in regards of your illness? And you can see that, well, you catch more cold when you sleep less. So with events, you have your reaction here, already anticipation, and then we move to underlying structures. So in the underlying structures, you start thinking, what has influenced the pattern that you have? And what are the relationships between different parts? In this regards, your sleep, less sleep, you got cold. What are the other interconnections? And this is where you see, while looking at the pattern and what influenced your sleep pattern, you see that, well, when you have more stress at work, more work to do, and intense time over there, you tend to sleep less, and this results in the less cold. And this is where you start the design phase. Right? So this is underlying structures. And then you move to the mental models. And in the mental models part, you ask a question for yourself, what assumptions, beliefs, or patterns do people hold about the system? In this case, do I hold about the system? And here you might think, well, work is more important, or I have to really push hard so I'm successful. And I'm successful just if I'm successful at work. Or health, in regards of health, the questions might be and assumptions that good quality food or ecological food is too expensive, right? So this is where transformation starts to happen, when you start catching the stories you tell for yourself, the mental models you are bringing for yourself. We'll start next time to talk about you as individual, you as a system. Then we will move to the next part. We will be looking to your team as a system, and we will end up with a company as a system. and those interconnected parts within it. And the last bit, before you move on into the homework, reading more about the techniques within the systems thinking, is thinking when you should use and apply systems thinking, when you should apply this zoom out function to what you do at work. So first, when the issue is important. Then when the problem is chronic, so it is repeating, you have maybe a pattern, it comes back to you, it's not a one-time event. When the problem is familiar and has known history. So not something very new that came up, but something that repeats over time. And with that, I always remember in the beginning of this learning program, when we had a meeting with all of you, and many of you stated that you have a challenge of having enough time for your people. So we might come to this and look at it as a system and deconstruct it as a system, how you can have more time to dedicate for your people. And the last bit, when people have unsuccessfully tried to solve the problem before, but they were not successful. So this is where you then zoom out, look at it as a system, how parts interact with each other, interconnect, and we can use as well the iceberg model for that. So I'm looking forward to meet you in a week where we'll concentrate on you. You can start thinking about yourself, about the purpose that you have, why you wake up every morning, and I'll be very curious to help you deconstruct this in the upcoming month. Bye for now.